They told you it was burnout, but they lied. Your body never did, though. The system lied. I'm Dr. Lorre Laws. Let's get into it. I want to take you to my dining room table on a Sunday morning a couple of years ago. It was the kind of quiet Sunday that asks really nothing of you. I had set the table the way I always do when people I love are going to join me. The good plates, the fresh flowers, fruit cut into little bowls, eggs and orange juice and all the pastries. Everything was catching the light as it came through those patio doors. A young nurse named Camille was on her way to me that morning, and I had no idea that the next 4 hours that we were going to spend together would change the course of her life. Now, Camille is my daughter Megan's best friend, her nursing school bestie, her ride or die from the trenches. And the two of them would often spend nights at my dining room table with flashcards till well past midnight. They studied from the same flashcards and even often had the same clinical rotations. And then when they graduated, they got pinned together and they cried in each other's arms in a graduation ceremony in a way that was, mostly celebratory and a little bit of fear or anxiety about what was coming next. And they both walked into practice carrying the very same license and the very same hope. One of those two new graduate nurses quickly saw what was coming, and the other did not. I've given a great deal of thought as to why that's the case, and the difference is almost embarrassingly simple. Megan, my daughter, grew up in the house at the same time I was conducting nurse trauma research and writing my book about that same topic as a recovery guide. So she was sitting at the dining room table every night hearing about the research I was doing, learning about what the nurses were experiencing and how the system really behaved. So when it came time for her to enter into practice, in less than 3 months, she already had a word for what was happening to her, and it wasn't burnout. Camille didn't have that advantage. Camille had the same thing that most of you are handed, the good nurse myth. Camille started and is still practicing as a labor and delivery nurse, and she has done literally everything that a quote-unquote good nurse does. She sat through those resilience modules, she practiced all the self-care, and yet she still was asked to take every shift for overtime, which she did. And then she took the shifts that they suggested or even hinted that she should take. Well, by 6 months into her practice, she was exhausted and aching for rest. And by the end of that year, she had not used any of her paid time off, her PTO, because her unit was chronically short-staffed. You know exactly how they do it. Oh, your patients need you, they say. We're a family here, and your family needs you. Ugh, I'm almost gagging as I say this back to you, because those are the very words that Camille repeated to me over that Sunday brunch. So she gave, and then she gave some more. And the system does what it always does. With a good nurse who is giving endlessly, it raises the bar. More patients, fewer resources, do more with less. Just be a good nurse. Rinse and repeat. Now here's the question that I've been sitting with, and perhaps you will too. Do you know what that good nurse devotion actually costs? You may not, but the body, it always keeps score. And over 2 years, Camille absorbed verbal abuse that would stop most people cold. She was kicked. She was scratched, all in the line of duty. One night, she was backed down a hallway by a man with fists raised, throwing threats at her, while she ran every de-escalation technique she had ever learned, completely alone, until a colleague finally heard the commotion and came to her aid. And we all know that Camille is not an outlier. According to a 2024 report from the American Hospital Association, half of the nurses in this country have been verbally abused, physically assaulted, or both by a patient or a patient's family member within the past 2 years. More than 1 in 4 nurses said that they're likely to leave the profession because of it. Cost doesn't just stay at work. It followed Camille home, and it lived in her body. On her days off, she had nothing left but the long, flat recovery from which she called she recovered. And we all know it so well, that work hangover. There's no energy or bandwidth left over for our own life. Just the slow climb back to baseline before the week started and she had to do it all over again. Those Sunday night scaries, they don't just happen on Sunday night. They can happen on any night when you're due back in for your shifts. Every nurse knows it. Our stomachs are probably turning at the thought of it, and the body starts bracing for going back, hours, if not days before. Camille cried in her car in the parking lot many days before work, afraid of what might be coming at her and who might be assaulting her. And she cried in her car after work because the shift was finally over, and only then could she begin to process and integrate everything that she had endured, everything that she had bore witness to, and all of the sympathetic overdrive that she experienced. You know, like the baby who didn't make it, or the baby that was born into CPS, Children's Protective Services, already in withdrawal before it took its first breath. The exposures, the trauma exposures, some of them unavoidable that come with that role, and many of them avoidable, like the staffing shortage and the lack of resources and the workplace violence. Those are all avoidable. And these unavoidable and avoidable trauma exposures, they just stack up inside. They just get stuck there, shift after shift, day after day, week after week, month after month, with no place for any of them to be processed and integrated and supported. Now, these are not abstractions to me. Camille is in the same numbers as most nurses. She has learned to scan the room for exits and be in a state of vigilance or hypervigilance before she can even assess a patient for their symptoms, knowing that half of nurses are being assaulted. And here's the thing. Camille thought it was burnout. She was told it was burnout. Burnout! For over 2 years, she had been telling Megan, my daughter, that she was burned out. And for 2 years, Megan kept encouraging her to look at nurse-specific trauma and see, is that what is happening here? But Camille brushed it away every time, citing those resilience models and what she learned in nursing school about self-care. Trauma, she thought, was for combat veterans, for survivors of violence, not for a labor and delivery nurse who was simply in her own mind failing to cope with a hard job. Well, this belief is not Camille's flaw. It's that good nurse myth, working exactly as it's designed to work. The word burnout was built to point the finger inward at the nurse, at the resilience, at the coping, at the failure to bounce back. It's a word that sends you into a wellness module instead of into the truth. Now, I'm going to pause here for one thing, and it's the same thing that started everything for Camille. I developed a free nurse trauma assessment, and it takes just about 60 seconds to complete. It will tell you in very plain terms how you are being affected, if you are being affected by burnout or nurse-specific trauma. Most nurses already know the answer in their body, but this just gives you the name and the framework and the science that you can hold. So go to drlorrilaws.com/assessment. That's drlorrilaws.com/assessment. And then come right back, because this is exactly where the story turns. Now, everything that Camille lived through traces back to the same 4 forces that have driven this profession to the brink. This staffing shortage that is not a shortage at all, but it's a hemorrhage. It's a manufactured hemorrhage to keep profits high and employee salaries low. Nurses are stretched far past human capacity. They are sick and they are suffering. They are suffering more than any of the other healthcare providers in any role. And that suffering pours out the first three and floods a nurse's home in her body and her sense of who she is. 4 forces, all pressing on one nervous system at the same time, in addition to the role itself. This is what's happening in Camille's nervous system, in Megan's, and in yours. And those 4 forces, they don't care what specialty you chose. They don't care if you're a direct care provider or in another nursing role. They don't care how prepared you are or how well loved you are. These forces came for Megan with every advantage I could possibly provide her, and they came for Camille, who had none of those advantages. And then they came for brunch. Camille arrived at my table that Sunday morning full of the weight of the unintegrated trauma that she had been holding. I had a sense that she wanted to talk about it, but just didn't know where to begin. So we filled our plates, poured our juice, had some lighthearted chit-chat, and then when she felt comfortable and safe, she started to open up. I mean, really open up in a way that is more of a stream of consciousness than ordinary conversation. She shared everything that she was holding and experienced in a way that a daughter might do. And I started to slowly, over our brunch, explain to her what I had been doing for the past 7 years in the writing of the book and trying to explain what was really happening to our profession and the nurses. That burnout is not a character problem. It is a symptom cluster of nurse-specific trauma. In a study that I conducted before leaving academia, I discovered that 76% of what the industry calls burnout maps directly onto trauma responses. That nurse-specific trauma touches 96% of nurses, and nearly 1 in 4 meet the full diagnostic criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. That is what was happening to Camille and in her nervous system and in her mitochondria. Her nervous system and her mitochondria both stuck in survival mode for so long that survival mode started to feel like the new normal, like her personality. We sat at my brunch table for 4 hours, and somewhere around the 3rd hour, I watched something shift in Camille's face. It was a particular thing, that shift. I have seen it in hundreds of nurses now, and it never stops moving me. It's the moment when the weight relocates, the moment when the truth drops, and the smoke screen of burnout gaslighting dissipates. It's when Camille and nurses stop carrying the blame that's sitting squarely on their own chest, and they set it down and place it directly where it belongs, on the system that engineered the breaking. Camille's nurse awakening had begun. So let me tell you what the nurse awakening really is, because it's at the heart of everything I do and everything I'm building with you and for you in the weeks ahead. The 4 forces, those are what breaks the nurse, and this is what they're designed to do. But the breaking was never meant to be the end of the story. There is a bridge that leads from the wreckage of those 4 forces towards something the system does not want you to know is even available. Liberation, professional safety, nervous system regulation, sovereignty over your midbrain, your autonomic nervous system, and your own career. And that is the very first board of the bridge. The first plank that you step onto is that nurse awakening. The moment you see it all clearly, the moment that the wrong word falls away and the true one takes its place. We've all felt it. We've all seen it in our students and our patients and our colleagues. That is the crossing from nurse awakening into awareness and the work that follows. And that's what awaits on the other side of regulation, reconnection within yourself, and with the people you love, and the restoration of your healer's heart, of what matters most to you in your life and in your work. I want every nurse that is hearing this to know that this bridge is real. It is standing right in front of you. The first board is right there, right now. And thousands of nurses have already crossed it through reading my book or engaging in the programs offered by my nonprofit. They are thriving, they are vital, and they are passionate. They got their lives back and their health back. And most importantly, they got their power back. Now, Camille had her nurse awakening at my dining room table, and it was beautiful to behold. She's awake to all of this now and what was done to her and what is happening inside of her own nervous system. Megan, my daughter, who we've talked about and who I've written and podcasted about, has also had her own nurse awakening within her first 4 months of practice and is doing the honest work of reclaiming her health and her power from a system that took both under the banner of training her to be a good nurse. And so the early career nurses I told you about last week, they're doing the same thing. The ones that are not even a year or maybe 18 months into their practice who wrote that what they were feeling is not a personal weakness, not at all. In fact, it's systemic and it's cumulative. That is and was, in their plain words, actually a form of trauma. And they were right. Camille believed the burnout myth for 2 years before the truth awakened within her. Many of you have carried it for 15, 20, 25, for an entire career. So please hear me on this. The length of time that you have carried the burnout myth is not a measure of how slow you are to see it. It's a measure of how thoroughly the myth was built to keep you from seeing it. The longer you held it, the less it was ever your fault. You did not fail to awaken. You were simply handed the science that would have you believe that the nurse awakening of nurse-specific trauma is possible. But you're being handled that science right now. You did not fail to awaken. You were simply never handed the science that would have made your nurse awakening possible. But you're being handed that science right here and right now. The first step onto that bridge is the one that Camille took without even realizing it was her first step. She let herself find out what was actually happening to her. And that's what the free nurse trauma assessment is designed to do. And it's the one thing I just really hope that you will do this week. It takes just a minute and it will tell you in plain terms with what you're living is burnout or nurse-specific trauma, to what degree, and importantly, what steps you can take to start your awakening and liberation now. Just go to drlorrilaws.com/assessment. The body is keeping the score that the system refuses to keep. Camille learned to read her body, her own scorecard, over brunch one Sunday morning on a quiet spring morning, and you can begin your nurse awakening process right now in 60 seconds. It's not too late. It's never too late. I would love to hear from you. What was the moment you first heard about nurse-specific trauma? When did your intuition first signal that there was something more than burnout going on? Reach out and share your story with me. I read and respond to every message personally. From my healer's heart to yours, and until next time, namaste.